Welcome to episode 16 of the Wood Whisperer video podcast. I'm your host, Mark Spagnolo, and on today's show, we're going to learn how to cut our own veneer. Now, you might be wondering why we'd want to go through all the trouble of cutting our own veneer when veneer is commercially available. Well, for me, the most important reason is this. Now here I've got a sheet of commercial veneer. It's about a 42nd of an inch thick. And this is a sheet of home sawn veneer, and it's about 3/32 of an inch thick. And because of this extra thickness, the material's much easier to work with, and we don't run the risk of sanding through like we would with a paper-thin veneer. Also, the furniture that we make with this will be much more durable, and it'll have the look of solid wood. Now, if there's a downside to home sawn veneers, it would probably be the fact that they're limited to the solid stock that you have on hand. So if you're looking for an exotic, highly figured wood, you're probably going to have more luck buying a bundle of commercial veneer than trying to hunt down the perfect piece of solid wood and slicing the veneer yourself. Now, whether you use commercial or home sawn veneers, it's very important that we learn how to work with this material for a number of reasons. Designs that would be impossible with solid wood are made possible with veneered sheet goods. And using veneer is more economical since a single 1-inch board can yield over 40 pieces of commercial veneer and about 6 to 8 pieces of home sawn veneer. And even rare pieces of figured lumber can be sliced into hundreds of sheets of veneer, which makes it possible for all of us to access the material. Now, thanks to mass-produced and cheaply made particle board furniture, veneer and plywood are 4-letter words to many furniture lovers. It's our responsibility as craftsmen to educate our friends, family, and customers so that they understand the value of veneered sheet goods. After all, the best craftsmen in the world are using veneer in their work, and veneer is no longer synonymous with poor quality. Now, in order to cut veneer, you're going to need a bandsaw. Cutting veneer is very strenuous work for a bandsaw, so the more power, the better. I'd recommend at least 1 horsepower. A properly tuned 14-inch 1 horsepower bandsaw should be able to handle cutting veneer. Just take your time and don't try to push it too hard. But first things first, we need to make sure our bandsaw is tuned up and ready for the demands we're about to place on it. Now, for more information on tuning up your bandsaw, check out the Wood Whisperer, episode 13, Bandsaw Setup and Tune-Up. The next thing we need is a good solid resaw fence. Now, there are 2 types of fences that you can use for resawing veneer. The first is a single point pivot style fence where the wood rests against a single point, allowing you to easily change direction as you push the wood forward. And second is a simple solid fence, kind of like what I have back here, where the fence is set to the drift angle and the workpiece is supported by the fence all the way through the cut. I prefer to use the solid fence style simply because once it's set, you can saw veneer all day and all you have to do is push the wood through. This means less eye strain, less stress, and fewer headaches. Now, the fences that come with bandsaws usually aren't adequate for resawing veneer. So you need to either reinforce the existing fence, which can be as simple as a piece of plywood double stick taped to the existing fence, or you could build an entire new one. Either one that slips over the existing fence and secures in place, or one that's completely standalone. Now, I think it's best to build one that's a complete standalone fence, primarily because it's easier to build, and also because we'll be able to use it on other saws in the future. So let me show you how to build one.
The resaw fence will be a simple structure made from 3/4-inch birch ply. It'll consist of a 24-inch by 5-inch bottom piece, a 24-inch by 7-inch front face, and 5 5-inch by 5-inch square supports. I start by determining the spacing of the supports. This doesn't have to be exact. I just need to leave some room on both ends for clamping. I add a little glue to the edge of one of the supports. Then I position it against the bottom board and brad nail it into place. It's critical that one side of this joint be perfectly flush. This is the side that the face of the fence will be attached to. I attach the remaining supports in the same manner. I turn the piece over 90 degrees and pre-drill for screws. 2 screws per brace should add the extra support that I'm looking for. I like to give the screw holes a quick sanding just to remove any torn out wood. And finally, I attach the face of the fence with glue and brads. I also add a few screws for extra reinforcement. A little sanding on the fence face, and our fence is done.
And we're just about ready to make our first test cut. But first, I'd like to discuss blade selection. Now, there's a number of opinions out there about which blade is best for cutting veneer, and the variety of blades on the market is just overwhelming. Now, for our purposes, just about any blade will get the job done. Some blades will cut smoother, some will cut faster, but they will all cut. And to prove that, I'm just using a blade that came with my saw. It's a 3/4 inch, 3 tooth per inch blade. Really nothing special. Now, if I get a decent cut with this blade, imagine what I can do with a premium blade. A premium blade can produce a surface that is so smooth that it's ready for glue and requires absolutely no sanding. So here's a few general blade recommendations. For boards that are 4 to 5 inches wide, use a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch blade with 4 to 6 teeth per inch with the least amount of set possible. Set being how much the teeth flare out on both sides, which ultimately affects the width of the cut. For wider boards, you want to use something that's a little faster cutting, so I recommend a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch blade with 3 teeth per inch.
Now it's time to set our fence in place. I set the fence about 1/8 of an inch away from the blade. I then use my stock fence, which should already be set for the drift, as a guide for the resaw fence. If the resaw fence is tight against the stock fence, then I know I'm in perfect alignment. I then secure the fence at one end with a clamp. I recheck the measurement, and then I clamp the other side. Now's a good time to take the final measurements at the bottom of the fence and the top of the fence just to ensure that they're exactly the same. If they're not, make the appropriate adjustments to the bandsaw table. If the jig was built properly, the fence should be exactly 90 degrees to the table. The blade should also be 90 degrees to the table. If your resaw fence isn't perfectly perpendicular with the top, it's not the end of the world. Just make sure the fence is perfectly parallel with the blade.
Now, in order to ensure even pressure against the fence, I'm going to use a homemade featherboard stack. Now, I just took 4 regular homemade featherboards, screwed them all together, and now I've got a tall featherboard that applies pressure over the entire face of the board. Now, here is our test board, which I just surfaced on 3 sides. I jointed one face and then one edge. Then I took it to the table saw and ripped the other edge so that I have a nice parallel board. Now, I marked one of the edges with a triangle, and that's going to help me keep all the sheets of veneer in order. I'll feed the board through with the jointed face up against the fence. So let's get this party started and make our first test cut.
Using my workpiece as a spacer, I clamp the featherboard stack into place. I don't want to apply too much pressure, just enough to keep the board securely against the fence. I usually center my featherboard right in the middle of the blade. With the jointed face against the fence, it's time to make our first cut. With a setup like this, there's not a whole lot that you can do wrong. Push with a moderate amount of speed and pressure. Keep your eye on the blade itself, and make sure everything is tracking properly. Now, toward the end of the cut, I like to use my right hand to pull the piece through the cut while carefully pushing with the left side using a long push stick.
Now let's take a look at our cut. That's not too shabby for a stock blade. Now it's a good idea at this point to look at the slice from all different angles and make sure everything looks okay, looks consistent. If we've got a wedge shape, then we know that the angle of the table is a little bit off. If the sheet gets a little bit thinner at one end than the other, then we know that the fence actually isn't properly set up for the drift, and we would need to repeat that part of the tune-up. But in most cases, you should end up with a reasonably nice piece of home sawn veneer. Now let's take a look at the original stock piece. Again, if we've got a rough surface here, of course, we're going to have a rough surface on the stock piece. So typically what I do is run this maybe 1 or 2 passes at the most over the joiner just to clean up that face and get ready for our second cut. Now, if the cut faces of your veneer are relatively smooth, you can usually just glue that side directly down to your substrate, giving you a nice smooth surface on the top. But if the surface is a little bit rough like mine is, you'll want to do a little sanding before the glue up. And I allowed for that extra bit of sanding when I set my fence to 1/8 of an inch. Now the best tool for this job is the drum sander. If you don't have one, you should try to find a friend that does. And if that's not feasible, then I recommend investing in a premium quality blade so that you get the cleanest cut possible. Personally, I like cutting my veneer sheets just a little bit thick at 1/8 of an inch and then sanding down to exactly 3/32 of an inch. It takes a little bit longer, but I tend to get more consistent results that way. And once we have all of our veneer cut and sanded, we need to think about the layout. Now in most cases, you'll need to join multiple sheets together in order to get the width that we're after. Now you remember that triangle that we drew on the edge earlier? When we reassemble our pieces, we should be able to use that triangle as a reference guide for the order. Now it's very important for design reasons to keep these sheets in order. Since each sheet has nearly identical grain patterns, we can come up with some pretty cool designs depending on which way we face our sheets when joining them. Let's cover the two most common arrangements.
The first pattern is called a book match. You simply turn one sheet over like a page in a book and glue the two pieces together. The resulting pattern is what looks like a mirror image. The second pattern is called a slip match. None of the pieces get flipped, they're just placed side by side. This is a good pattern for really wide panels.
And once we have the pattern we're looking for, all we need to do is glue these guys together to make them into one solid sheet. It's actually easier than it looks. All you need is a little bit of blue tape.
Using a lot of finger pressure, I stretch the tape across the joint and press it down firmly on the show side of the veneer. I usually place a piece of tape every 6 to 8 inches. Then I run a single strip of tape across the length of the joint. Now I flip the board over and make a little V-shaped tent. This opens up the joint, giving me a nice channel for a bead of glue. I then flatten the board, wipe away the squeeze out, and place another piece of tape along the length of the joint. I also like to use a wooden seam roller to make sure that the joint is nice and flat. Now if you happen to notice a gap along the joint line, have no fear. A gentle pass or two over the joiner will solve the problem.
And believe it or not, that's all there is to cutting your own veneer. You may run into a few snags here and there, but if your bandsaw is set up properly and your wood is flat and square, the resawing process should go quite smoothly. Just a quick tip, be sure to wax the bandsaw table and the fence thoroughly. That'll make your life a whole lot easier as you push the wood through the blade. So the next step would be to glue this veneer sheet to a substrate. But that's a topic for another show. Now personally, I think veneering is a technique that we should all learn. Whether you use commercial or home sawn veneer, your design options expand dramatically when you begin to incorporate veneer into your work. It's a great way to get the most out of your tools, your wood supply, and your craft. Now just a few quick updates for you. Don't forget to check out Wood Talk Online at woodtalkonline.com. We just added a voicemail feature where you can leave us voicemails over the internet just using your computer microphone. It's really cool. And if you haven't been to the Wood Whisperer site in a while, you might have missed the new streaming video webcam and the chat room. Both are worth checking out, and I believe I've got about 10 people watching me right now. Hi guys! Now lastly, don't forget to check out the Wood Whisperer store. Not only can you find great woodworking equipment and supplies there, you can click the link at the top left that says go to Amazon.com. That'll take you directly to Amazon.com itself, and all of your woodworking and non-woodworking purchases will benefit the show. Thanks everybody!